everybody that's listed in your will in some way plays a role in that court process. And I have people that are like, oh, that was my mom's friend 50 years ago. I have no idea where that person is. And again, it just lengthens the process. It lengthens the court proceeding, and it causes just more grief and more stress.
So it's penny wise and pound foolish.
Welcome to Riding Counsel with Rich Jaffe, where the open road meets expert advice. I'm Richard Jaffe, an attorney and biking enthusiast, and this is the podcast where we dive into the world of motorcycling, safety, culture, charitable giving, and riding right. So, whether you're a seasoned rider or just getting started, let's talk bikes, the road, and everything in between. Let's ride!
Hello, ridingcounsel.com world. Thanks so much for joining us. And by the way, I am Rich Jaffe. I am a personal injury lawyer. I am a podcaster, and I am a bike enthusiast. So if you like what you see here and hear here, do me a favor, like, subscribe, smash the buttons. It really helps me out. I appreciate it. And I have a really amazing guest today that I think is going to give us a lot of great information. And her name is Melissa Carvajal. And she, like I am, she's a lawyer, but she's a heck of a lot smarter than me and is going to speak about some really important stuff. But I don't want to babble too much about her because I'm just basically in awe of her intelligence. But I'm going to ask Melissa to tell me about, or tell you all about herself. So Melissa, who are you? What do you do? Where do you do it?
Okay, so professionally, who am I? I am an attorney. I have an office located in Hauppauge, and I specialize in estate planning, elder law, and probate administration.
Wow. Okay. So what is that? I that's a lot of big words, and I didn't do so well on my verbal SAT. So please help me out. What is that?
So pretty much estate planning is making sure that you have a plan in place if you ever become incapacitated. When we're older, we think of incapacity like dementia, getting diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or MS. When we're younger, we think of temporary incapacities like car accidents or random acts of violence or any type of medical issues. And we want planning in place so that the people that you want are going to be making decisions for you, and the decisions are actually your decisions.
Wow. Okay. So this is like a world unto itself, because me personally, I handle motorcycle accidents. I do personal injury. I do trials. I pick juries and stuff like that. But I mean, this whole estate planning thing, this is just a world unto itself. How did you get here? How did you get into this?
Well, I got into estate planning actually. A lot of people think of estate planning and they think it's only for the rich or wealthy because they hear the word estate. So they start thinking of like trust fund babies and having vast, dynasty estates. Or they think it's only for the elderly and people that are, on death's doorstep, and they want to make sure that their, hard-earned money or their homes go to the people that they want. But actually, estate planning, and the reason I got into estate planning is really, I feel, most important when you are someone like myself that is has young children. A lot of people, when they have young children, they're kind of in the wealth accumulation phase of their life, and they don't have extra money to go spending on estate planning. But the truth is that when you have young children, that's the time when estate planning is really the most critical, because God forbid something happens to you. You want to make sure that you have the people in place that are going to care for your kids in the way that you would have wanted them cared for, and have the financial resources to be able to bring your kids up the way that you would have wanted to bring them up. And I got into estate planning because of a very tragic story that I was involved in, where a 34-year-old man was thrown from a car and suffered a traumatic brain injury. And he had a 32-year-old wife and a 2-year-old daughter. And decisions that were made at the hospital and arguments that occurred with the family, and also seeing in time what had occurred with things that are titled only to a person that's incapacitated, that's in the hospital and unable now to sign any contracts or to have any capacity to be able to do anything, what that does to the family and what that does to the people that are left behind. It was something that I was very passionate about, to make sure that people that, like myself, I call us the sandwich generation, which is people that have young children, and we're worried about our young children. But then we also have parents that are getting to the age where we need to start thinking about doing long-term care planning. And we're kind of pulled in both directions, both sides of the bread, to make sure that our kids are cared for and our parents are cared for. And that is kind of why I got into estate planning.
This episode has been brought to you by Riding Counsel. Don't forget to visit us at ridingcounsel.com.
Wow. I mean, that's first of all, that's a really sad story. I'm really sorry to hear that that happened to those
Mhm.
people. But you know, I personally, I want to decide what happens if I can't communicate or if I pass,
Mhm.
if I'm dead. I want to decide what happens to my property, and if I don't have a will or I don't have directives, then I guess the state steps in and tells you. Isn't that something that happens?
Right. So I tell a lot of people that people say, well, I have no plan. And I said, oh, you have a plan. New York State has a plan for you. And it might not be what you want. And just like you were saying, you want to be the person that's making the decisions for yourself. If you are incapacitated, what decisions you would want. But you also want to be electing the people that you would want making those decisions. And then with your stuff, people want to make sure it goes to the people that they want. And a lot of times people will think, well, I have a spouse, so obviously my spouse will just get everything, which isn't the rule in New York State. If you die and you do not have a will and you do not have a trust in place, New York State says that your spouse gets the first $50,000 of your estate and half of what is left. And your kids actually share in the other 50%. So in the situation like I was just explaining, if you have minor kids, all of a sudden now your kids are going to inherit things which they legally can't inherit until they're actually 18. So your money, your home could be, wrapped up in a court proceeding or wrapped up with a guardian until your kids turn 18. And it's not a situation where your spouse just gets your house or your spouse just gets your bank accounts just because they're legally your spouse. So New York State has a plan which most people that I meet don't want that as their plan.
You know, you bring up a really good point though, because you say in New York State because both you and I are in New York, but it can differ in other states, right?
Exactly. And if people have, a lot of people in New York, we hate the winters here. So we're snowbirds. We have properties that are in New York, but then we have properties that are in Florida or some other state. And now your family is dealing with New York State laws and then the laws of the state where your other property is.
Yeah, it could get really, really hairy.
Gets
So
time consuming and expensive.
yeah, yeah. If you don't have a will, right? If you don't have these documents, it can
Well,
get
no, that's a
really.
common misconception also. A lot of people think if I have a will, I've said who I want in charge and I've said where I want my stuff to go, and that's it. But the truth is, if you have a will, your family is guaranteed to go to court. A will is actually not worth the paper that it's written on until you actually die and until somebody actually brings that original will to court. So if you have property in New York and you live in New York and you have a property, like in my example in Florida, you are actually having to go through a court process in New York and in Florida, which means you're paying double court fees, you're paying double legal fees, and you're actually waiting, a duration in time where someone doesn't have access to any of that property that you've left them until your will is actually reviewed and approved by a judge.
Oh, oh man. Okay. So what's the right thing to do? I mean, should we get a will, or is it better not to be with a will, or
So I wouldn't
what?
say that anything is the right or the wrong thing to do. I say that I want people to make informed decisions. So I want to lay out for you what the law would be in New York State based on your specific family and based on your specific assets, how you own things. A lot of people, as I said, they come in and they have bought a property. People get married later in life now. I got married later in life. And we have assets before we get married. And so people think, oh, well, I have my house and I have this deed, but my spouse lives there, my kids live there. If I die, my spouse is just going to get this house. And they don't realize how things are titled and they don't realize what would happen based on those specific ways that things are owned.
Hmm.
So it's not so much about what is right or what is wrong. It's really what you want to happen and how you want to protect your family or protect your own decisions. So I always tell people when they're going to leave that they always have to answer two questions, which is one, do you want to plan for your incapacity? Do you want to make sure that if you do become incapacitated in any way, whether it be, 60 years from now, and God forbid you get a terrible diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's, or now if you're in a car accident. I mean, we both live in New York and in Long Island. I mean, Southern State is just like the home of so many car accidents and so many places where there's fatalities and people that become incapacitated. And you really want to make sure that if you are incapacitated, that you have the people elected that you want to be making decisions for you. And those decisions could be something as having a do not resuscitate signed, or whether or not you're an organ donor. What are your actual wishes? And there's plenty of unfortunate court cases or family fights that happen where people, even siblings that get along, when they're faced with the question, should we insert a feeding tube in mom, that they argue and their relationships are broken and to the point where sometimes they're irreparable. And so if the parent had gone and done their planning, at least their wishes would be memorialized and kids wouldn't be standing over a hospital bed fighting. So it's really the protections that you want to make for yourself. And when I say that, I say, like, what is your voice in the room if you can't speak for yourself? What are your wishes for organ donation? What are your wishes as to whether you'd want to be kept alive by life support or a feeding tube? And who do you want making those decisions? Because if you don't have somebody elected, then, one child or one family member is going to have to make that decision for you. And if they don't know if that's what you would have chose, they may carry guilt for the rest of their lives, or they may be fighting with their family members about what decision that they ended up making. So it's important that you decide for yourself your own end of life decisions, but also who you want making those decisions. And then with regards to whether I should have a will or whether I should have a trust or what type of planning I should even have in place, it's really up to you as to what you want your family to have to go through in an already traumatic and sad time where they're grieving. And that's really, people just have to make informed decisions. Do they want their family members to have to go through the court process, or do they want their family members to avoid the court process?
Wow. I mean, this is heavy stuff, and it's serious, and it's things that, I mean, I ride. Do you ride a motorcycle, Melissa?
I do not.
Okay. All right. Well, look,
I can barely drive my car. I only know I get places when I hit the curb.
Well, look, I mean, I have a motorcycle. I do a lot of riding, and when you're out getting a motorcycle, it's a happy time, and it's really, it's emotionally happy. But as a motorcyclist, as a biker, when I'm buying that bike and I'm getting on that bike, I'm not thinking about this stuff. I mean, how important do you think it is for bikers to think about these documents, like planning an estate and having a will and having all these directives for the afterlife?
Well, unfortunately for motorcyclists, I feel, and I could be wrong, that when there's an accident that involves a motorcyclist, oftentimes it's a fatality because it's more dangerous to drive a motorcycle, right, than a car. But I think that it's important for everybody to have an estate plan if you care about your wishes being followed, and if you care about the people that you love being able to do things in an efficient and not expensive way. So it's only as important as you feel it is that your wishes are followed. I have plenty of clients and I have plenty of people in my life that would never, ever want to be kept alive in a hospital bed on life support. And if their wishes aren't known, that may happen. I have plenty of people that are in my life and that are my clients that are either adamant that they want to be organ donors or they don't want to be organ donors. And if somebody doesn't know your wishes, they may not be followed. Whether you are buried or cremated, if somebody doesn't know your wishes, they may not be followed. So it's only as important as it is to you to make sure your wishes are followed. And it's only as important as you want what's left behind for your family. If you want to be leaving your family in a mess, I mean, as I said, people will get married later in life. Also, we're in New York, and New York, Suffolk County, where I am, is the leading county for divorces. And so there's a little fun fact for you. Out of the 62 counties in New York, but people get divorced, and a lot of people have blended families. A lot of people have, children from their first marriage, and then they have children from a second union, or they only have children from their first union. And people end up disinheriting their kids because they get remarried and they don't realize that the planning that they have in place, or the lack of planning that they have in place, they're doing that. So it's very important to be looking at specifically your family. And I know you said, is it more important for somebody that's riding a motorcycle? It's important, I think, for everybody that is driving a car, everybody that's driving a motorcycle. But as I said, it's really just what you want, if you want your wishes to be followed, and what you want your family to go through.
All right. So we're talking about a lot of different types of documents here, but I hear a term thrown around all the time, and I really don't understand it. And I'm hoping you can explain it to me and the listeners. It's called a living will. What's a living will?
So a living will is the legal name for what a lot of people equate to the medical term of a DNR, a do not resuscitate. A living will, I like to say, is your voice in the room. A living will outlines what your end of life wishes are, which if you would want to be kept alive by artificial means or machinery, life support, a feeding tube, artificial hydration, any type of artificial ventilation, but in situations where there's no reasonable expectation of recovery. So you have a terminal condition, or you have irreversible brain damage, or you're conscious but would never regain the ability to speak for yourself, what you're essentially saying to your family is, I do or do not want to be resuscitated. I do or do not want to be kept alive by artificial means where my body could be kept alive, but really I would never recover. I would never regain the ability to wake up and recognize my family, or walk or talk, or, go to the bathroom or shower myself. In these certain circumstances, do I want to be resuscitated? So a lot of people think of the living will like a DNR.
I
It's really
see.
should be called a right to die, but I guess that name isn't as catchy as a living will.
Right. Right. And I guess, that goes along with, a right to die, I guess, with dignity, right? So we all, I guess, want to give ourselves dignity and
Mhm.
our loved ones dignity, if that has to be done. And we
Right.
don't want to struggle over a hospital bed or have family fights. Like, this is what I
Right.
wanted to happen. And so it really provides like a true definitive path for people to follow so it doesn't
Exactly.
linger.
It's your, I feel like with family members, with kids, it's easier. Obviously, I'm using that term. It's not easy, but it's easier to just follow someone's directions than have to make the decision for yourself and then always wonder if it was the decision was right and the decision that someone would have wanted.
All right. So basically a living will is when essentially you're still alive. You're incapacitated, but you're still alive.
Right. So a living will is not a last will and testament. A living will is an expression of your end of life wishes.
And a will is after you die. Is that what it is?
Right. So a living will is going to be used while you're alive to determine or to explain to everybody what you would want done under very specific circumstances where you are alive but cannot speak for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
A will is only a last will and testament is used when you die in order to appoint somebody who you want to be in charge of handling your affairs. That person is called an executor, and then is to explain to a judge a roadmap of where you want your assets to go. And by
All right.
assets, we can mean properties, homes, vacant lands, businesses, and really anything that doesn't have a beneficiary listed.
All right. So I have a lot of bike riders in my audience, and
Hmm.
I ride motorcycles too. So I could tell you that a lot of people who I ride with have these motorcycles that they love and that have been passed on for a couple of generations, and they're real rarities. And aside from its monetary value, it also has a value of significance, a sentimental value. And what happens if you want the motorcycle to be passed on to somebody specific and you don't have a will? I mean, it sounds like a will would be really important in that situation.
Right. So if you don't put your wishes down as to who you would want to receive any type of tangible personal property or any type of motor vehicle, then your next of kin, and New York State decides who your next of kin is legally, can go to the Department of Motor Vehicles, and this is again in New York State, and they can fill out a transfer of title form, and that person can, have the title transferred to them for whatever that motor vehicle is. But that does not necessarily mean it is the person that you would want it going to.
Right. So I guess the laws of different states really come into play here. And I mean, bikers also like to take long trips sometimes, right? So, if you're in New York, let's say you might take a trip down to Florida, or you might take a trip across the country to California and drive through all these states. And it sounds a little chancy if you pass away in another state, say Utah or Arkansas or something. w- does the will, if you execute it in one state like New York, does that have an effect on what happens if you die in another state?
Yeah. So all of your advanced directives. So we were talking about like your healthcare proxy, like the person that would make decisions for you, or your living will, what your wishes are. As long as they're executed properly in the state that you're a resident, they'd be reciprocal in any of the 50 states. So if you get into an accident, like in your example, you're driving your motorcycle from New York to Florida, and in Florida you get into an accident, the lawyer or your family member can easily fax down a healthcare proxy, and that will be accepted, as I said, as long as it was executed properly in the state where you're a resident. As far as where you die, if you die out of state, the will, wherever you're a resident, will be probated, and wherever you have property will be probated. So again, in your example, if you're just out for a vacation and you're riding your motorcycle down to a different state and you happen to die in that state, your will is still going to be probated in the state where you're a resident and the state where you did the will.
All right. All right. So, I mean, are these the kind of documents you think that bikers should have with them, like in their saddlebags? Like, we carry, excuse me,
Mhm.
we carry our license with us. we carry our registration with us, we carry our insurance on the motorcycle with us, maybe even our health insurance. But we're talking about a lot of important documents
Mhm.
that are really going to have a very big impact, not only on us when we're incapacitated or deceased, but also on our families and our loved ones. So, do you think that we should carry these types of documents with us on the motorcycle?
I definitely think a healthcare proxy should go with you, especially when you're doing a motorcycle ride. I personally give all my clients a card for their wallet. It kind of looks like this. And on the back of it is my information, but on the front, I won't show you this person's, but on the front of it has all their healthcare proxy information. And what I have a lot of elderly clients. So I say, if you're driving and you ever get into a car accident, or if you ever at the mall and you get disoriented or you fall and you hit your head and the police or the paramedics are going through your wallet, you should have this card right behind your ID, because not only then will they know who you are, but they're going to know who you have as your healthcare proxy, and they'll have that person's phone number, and they'll even have your backup proxy phone number. So, and if they can't get those two people, then they have my information, and I always can fax over a healthcare proxy to any doctor or hospital, but also I would know your other family members so that I'm able to give them contact information to make sure that a family member is aware that you've either been in an accident or that you are disoriented wherever you are.
Wow,
But it is important.
that's so smart. I mean, that's, I mean, maybe even like something digital or something like that too. Maybe somebody can
Right.
carry like a
And as I said,
QR
I
code.
started my law firm to deal with people that have to deal with families that have young kids. So if you do have young kids, I also put on the card that you have minor kids at home, because if you get into an accident and a paramedic or a police officer is looking through your ID, they're not necessarily going to know that you have little kids at home with a babysitter. So we want to make sure that the police are able to go to the house and make sure that the kids are all right and in the care of somebody that can actually care for them if you are taken to the hospital and even temporarily incapacitated or, God forbid, die.
Yeah. So, I mean, it also sounds like it's important, especially for bikers. I mean, for everybody, but especially for
Mhm.
bikers, to keep their lawyer's information along with everything else, because their lawyer is going to have the documents if you need them in a hurry.
Right. Most
They
people aren't, think of just driving your car. You're not driving around with your healthcare proxy. So I get calls all the time from people that are asking me to, give an electronic copy of the healthcare proxy to a hospital or to a doctor's office.
wow,
And that's the time when, kids will be like, well, what are my parents' wishes?
right, and they really have no idea if they have no documents at all. So,
Right.
at least their parents had the forethought to create all these
Right.
documents. Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, look, we were also talking about expenses, right? We have the expenses of doing something known as, well, probating a will. But
Mhm.
when we use that phrase, can you just let us know, what is probating a will? What does that mean?
So probate is the court process that you have to go through when you have a will. So a will has to be reviewed and approved by a judge, and a judge has to make sure that the will is validly executed and contains the proper language. And then that court process can take an amount of time. So when we talk about the expenses, we're not just talking about the expense of the lawyer and the expense of paying the court fee. We're talking about the time expense, which a lot of times to my clients is more important than the expense of paying for the probate. I mean, even having to find a lawyer, I mean, people hate lawyers, no offense. So it's like even having to contact and find a lawyer, for us, it's easy because we have a network of people. So if I had somebody that needed a personal injury lawyer, I could refer them to you. If I knew somebody that was going through a bankruptcy or a divorce, I have lawyers that are in my network. But you figure somebody that isn't a lawyer and doesn't have any type of like networking group, or isn't, a member of the bar, a family member where their parent just dies is literally Googling, trying to figure out what attorney they're going to use during the most difficult time of their life. So even the expense of their time and energy and attention of trying to find a lawyer is tough. But then the idea that they're going to have to wait a year to probate a will, in most places in New York, meaning they're not going to have access to whatever assets are going through that will. So with a home, for example, you have a house that somebody doesn't have the legal authority to sell or have the legal authority to rent. And if you have your own house, and we're in New York, so we know how expensive taxes are here, and you're
Right.
paying your taxes and your mortgage and you're paying all your household bills, and now your parent passes and they only have a will, which means you're going through that year-long court process, you're going to have to pay the taxes on now your parents' home. So the idea that somebody just has, $10,000, $20,000 lying around to pay somebody else's taxes, and to pay the upkeep of a home, and to also check on that house, these are time expenses. And if you have little kids and now you have to go to maybe a different county, or you have to go into the city, or to check on somebody's house to make sure anything that happens with a house, that your pipes didn't burst, in the winter, that your basement didn't flood, in a bad rainstorm, that there's no squatters in the house. This is time where people have to spend going to their parents' house and making sure none of these things occurred while they're also living their own life. So it's not just the monetary expense of probating the will and going through this court process. It's the time expense of waiting the year where you're now responsible for someone else's home.
And you can't get that time back. I mean, it could be years. I mean, it could be so long before everything is resolved. I mean, who wants that?
Right. And
God,
that's just, there's everybody, I always tell everybody thinks they're so unique with their story when they come in and they say that they have a child that either has a substance abuse problem or a gambling problem, or, for one reason or another, they're disinheriting them. But everybody has a story. Everybody has a family. Everybody has a black sheep. And the idea that, somebody can easily contest your will, or easily come forward and say, oh, my parent had dementia and they forgot that I was their child. Meanwhile, they've been estranged for 40 years. To come up and, to contest a will, and then your wishes aren't followed is a problem that you face when you have just a will.
Wow. Yeah. So, okay. So, I mean, time, really, really time, it saves time, and it lessens the pain in a really hard situation. We know that. But is there any way? I mean, a lot of people want to say, "Oh, I don't need a lawyer like this. I'll just go online. I'll save some money. I'm going to go to like LegalZoom or whatever, Papa Bear, or one of these online places that say, hey, all you got to do is download the form and fill a couple of things out, put your name, your number, and stuff like that, sign, and you'll be fine." I mean, what do you think about something like that?
So I think a couple of things. I think when you're going onto LegalZoom, or you're going onto like, trustandwill.com, or even people are using like AI now and saying like, hey, ChatGPT, like write me a will in New York State. The first thing I guess I would say is that you're missing the relational lawyer component. It's your family is going to have no one to call after you die. If you do something like that, there's no one to explain to them what the wishes are. There's no one to explain to them what happened. And I also think that there is a false sense of security. Once you do something like that, you feel like you've checked the box. Oh, I've done my estate plan. I printed out this will and I signed it and I followed the directions and I executed it properly. And now I'm going to go put it on a shelf and live, 50 more years of my life and never look at it. But the truth is that your estate plan is not something that you do a one and done time and you put it on a shelf. It's a living thing. And I do with my clients a 3-year review. So every 3 years I call them up and I make sure that the people that they still want in charge of their decisions are still the people, and that no one has been born, no one's died, no one has been incapacitated, you haven't sold or bought property. A lot of times with these do-it-yourself plans on like LegalZoom or these other forums, it gives you a false sense of that you've done something. And honestly, they usually leave your family in a bigger mess because no one ever goes back to them. No one ever makes sure they're updated. And I would say every, probate story that I have is somebody that comes in when their parent did a will, years and years ago, and not, if you did it 20 years ago, obviously it wasn't on LegalZoom or something like that, but it was like a do it yourself, or I went to the library and I got it done for free. And, they've named guardians for their kids that are now 40 and 50 years old. And the court will make you find those guardians. And, even if they're going to say, oh, yeah, of course, this person is 50 years old, they don't need a guardian. Everybody that's listed in your will in some way plays a role in that court process. I have people that are like, oh, that was my mom's friend 50 years ago. I have no idea where that person is. And again, it just lengthens the process. It lengthens the court proceeding, and it causes just more grief and more stress.
So it's penny wise and pound foolish.
Right. So, I mean, yeah, you could save some money doing it yourself or paying, I don't know how much it is on one of those websites. But again, your family has nowhere to turn. No one is doing an inventory of your assets. You're just assuming that you're correctly doing it. But it's kind of the same thing. Like we're all like web doctors. I see something on my skin. I go to WebMD and I diagnose myself. You would never do that. You're like, you could get yourself all scared, but then you're actually going to go to a doctor, and you're actually going to want to go to somebody that has the education and has the practice and knows the correct questions to ask. So a lot of people think, oh, I have, I have my 401k or I have my bank accounts, and I, in my will, said that I want them all to go to my daughter and I'm disinheriting my son. but they have somebody totally different listed as a beneficiary, and they don't know that that doesn't go through the will because they didn't have a lawyer in front of them asking them the correct questions and making sure that they have all their assets inventoried and making sure their specific family dynamics are, in play in that document. The documents honestly are just a byproduct of estate planning. They're the deliverables. But if you don't have the trusted advisor relationship with the attorney, you're not going to be able to have somebody to call when maybe you do a will or a trust, but then as you get older in life, you want to do some type of long-term care planning. You don't have that relationship built in. So the same way that I would say that you need a doctor and you just don't diagnose yourself on Google, I would say you would need a lawyer.
Wow, and this is a really important point. People think like, okay, you write up some documents and there you go, you have it, right? And that's something I call like a static, just a static situation where it's staying still. But I mean, wills and healthcare proxies, I mean, these are dynamic things. They're always changing. Just like you said, if somebody's born, if somebody dies, if somebody reaches maybe 18 or 21, or, they come down with a sickness that incapacitates them. I mean, you really have to be careful with this stuff. And it doesn't really sound like
And a lot of times spouses, when they have kids, they have little kids. So they start thinking, all right, let me make sure I have guardians in place. So they do their estate plan. They come and they do a will, or they do a healthcare proxy or a power of attorney, and they list the spouse. And that's great for as long as they're both alive. But then when one spouse passes, you're now putting the onus on the surviving spouse to make sure they remember to now make sure they have somebody that's in charge of making all these decisions and revisiting it. And a lot of time they don't. A lot of times the kids that were listed as the minor kids with guardians in a will, the surviving spouse passes, and then the kids are left without having any type of responsibility to be the executor. It's somebody else that's named in there, and maybe that person has died. And so they are really things that they're dynamic and they should be changing as time changes.
Okay, so I got a lot of problems here now, and I'm gonna have to call you because after this podcast is over, because I got a lot of questions. And God, you are so knowledgeable about this stuff. I'm incredibly thankful for you coming on here and spending the time to explain this stuff, because first of all, I don't think enough people talk about it. And second of all, it's so relevant and so important to people who ride motorcycles. I mean, everybody, but especially for people who ride motorcycles who might be in a place where, that they're not originally from, or they have to update their wills or something, anything before they take the risk of, riding their motorcycles. But look, if people want to be like me and be careful about this stuff and ask you questions, I mean, how do we get in touch with you? If people want to ask you questions, I'm sure they can. I mean, can they call you? Do you have a website? How do we find you?
I do. So my name is Melissa Carvajal. It's on the screen. My law office is called the Law Office of Melissa L. Carvajal, PC. I know that's very creative. You can find my website, which is carvajallawfirm.com. Or you can call me at 631-371-3861. Or you can just Google Melissa L. Carvajal and I should come up.
Okay, so this is great. And for all of the watchers on YouTube, I'm going to put all the information down here, all the links to for Melissa, so you can get in touch with her. But Melissa, if I can ask you just to do me a favor, because aside from YouTube, there's people who just listen on podcasts. So can you spell out your website and just go over your phone number one more time, just a little slow, so people can remember it? And go ahead.
So my name is Melissa, Melissa, and my last name is Carvajal, Carvajal, and my phone number is 631-371-3861. And my website is carvajallawfirm.com. So CARV as in Victor, AJAL, and then LAWFIRM.com.
And just to be clear, so you can handle estate planning, the living wills, everything that we talked about today. You can handle this.
Yes, everything that we talked about today.
And when somebody calls you to retain you or ask for your services, do you do it yourself, or you have associates running around? Or tell me what that structure is like.
I think one thing that's very important is that when you hire me, you get me, which means that I would be the person that you meet with, and there's no bait and switch. I have worked at places before where you meet the attorney, you love them or you like them, you want to hire them, and then that's the last time you ever see them. So if you hire me, I do have a staff. So, but if you hire me, you will get me. I will be the one that's designing your plan. I'll be the one that's drafting your plan. And then I will be the one that would be signing the plan for you. And then you will be contacting me with all of your questions.
Well, I could tell you from a lawyer's point of view, a fellow attorney in the community, you are very well respected. Everybody says, just call Melissa because nobody's going to know. Melissa will know. Just call her and you're going to get the right answer. So, and I've also retained you for services for me and my family. And I really appreciate everything that you've done. You really explained everything. So I encourage anybody with questions for any kind of estate planning or any of the things we discussed today, please just call Melissa. I am the first to admit I know nothing about this area of law. I do personal injury motorcycle accidents. Melissa, she is really on top of her game, as you see. So I just want to say thank you, Melissa, for spending time just coming on here, explaining all these things to all the listeners and the watchers. And we're going to have all your information below. So anybody who has a question, please get in touch with Melissa.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Riding Counsel with Richard Jaffe. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the ride, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share with your fellow riders. Until next time, keep the rubber side down and ride safe.